Hey everybody, Holly here. I'm one of the conscious agents with Reality Sandwich, and today I'm joined by Jess, who's going to be sharing a unique experience with us. Welcome, Jess. It's nice to connect with you here. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you.
I'm Jess. I'm from southwestern PA, born and raised. Basically, spent the entirety of my life in Pennsylvania and Maryland. I moved back to my hometown a few years ago, and I'm living in a really old house with my boyfriend. And we're getting ready to open up an antique business. So that's what I'm focusing on these days.
Okay, that's super cool. So that's what all the antiquing is about. You're starting your own business. That's rad.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it going to be like a physical store or online? Physical
Yeah,
store.
we're
Cool.
going into this pretty old craftsman house, and yeah, it's 3 stories, so it's going to be pretty exciting.
That is really cool,
Yeah,
actually. What a fun project to be. Antiquing is fun, but when you're antiquing like that, where you're just collecting, that's awesome.
yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about your history with psychedelics or your experience with psychedelics, how you kind of got into being interested in plant medicines.
Yeah, I had started experimenting in college, and the first like profound experience I had with psychedelics was with LSD when I was a sophomore in college, and I ate some with my friends, and we ended up just like being outside all night, walking through the woods and walking through the downtown area. And then I started to get the visuals, and it was just like profoundly awesome. And it just set me off on this course that whole semester where I just like experimented. I ate shrooms, and I basically bounced back and forth between shrooms and acid like every few weeks. I kind of looking back, I went too hard on it. But after the semester was over, I like had this realization that it's not something that's meant for me to do frequently. And so I kind of, scaled back a little bit and just saved it for special occasions. And one thing that I really enjoyed was diving deep and doing it by myself and just sitting outside and taking it all in. And every time it was all over, I would end up with the realization that all the shit that I worry about all the time just doesn't really matter, and it's all just a mess that I create in my head to keep my mind busy. I think because the stillness and simplicity of everything, it's like the silence is deafening to me. I'm used to being overstimulated, so I like to create. I think a lot of people are used to it, and we like to create all this mess in our heads. And yeah, that's one of the great things that's my biggest takeaway from it is every time, like even no matter how crazy it gets, at the end of it all, I just walk away with this realization that none of it is really that important in the sense that I need to worry about it all the time.
That's a great takeaway. When you started like sitting with yourself, did you gravitate more towards mushrooms or LSD? Like, did you have a preference, or
I
what's the different experience like for
I
you?
gravitated more towards LSD because mushrooms felt like they sometimes they got physically sloppy. Like I didn't like the way that my body felt, and I would get nausea sometimes. And I understand the whole purging thing. Like I've purged, but then sometimes I feel like it was just, my body just didn't like it. One thing that is funny is when I started to get LSD, it was from a friend that I bought pot from in college. And he said that it was from someone special who had traveled with like the Merry Pranksters. It was from someone special whose mentor traveled with the Merry Pranksters back in the day. And then years later, I got out of college and I ended up moving to Pittsburgh, and I met someone. Um, just, I think it was at a show or something. I was introduced to this person, and it turns out that he was the connection that it was coming from. And he told me this whole story about this guy that made it, and, how important it was to make, to have like a high quality product, because there's so much stuff it's mucked up, the process isn't right. And so I was pretty fortunate to, like, I didn't realize until years later, but like every time I'd eaten it, it had been from this person. So it was like this one type that, was, from what I was told, was pretty clear and nice. And yeah, and then like I ended up eating some at some point from my cousin, and it was just from someone else, and it was just so disgusting. And I could tell, I think it was like a designer LSD, like, the variations of it, and it just wasn't for me. So yeah, I always gravitated more towards acid just because I had like the best physical experience with that. And I liked the visuals with both, but like when it came to like sitting with everything mentally, like I feel like things just flowed better for me with LSD.
I would tend to agree with you. I feel like so many people are on the opposite side of that spectrum. I'm trying to get to the bottom of why that is. Like, I feel like LSD is almost like it's a little bit brighter, and it
Yes.
makes me want to like open my arms and hug the universe around me. And mushrooms kind of make me want to like crawl into my shirt under the ground, like a little bit of a grittier place in a
Yeah,
way.
definitely grittier. That, and it's funny that you say that, because most people I say are like, "Oh, I like mushrooms better," and I'm like, "Yeah, they're not bad, but I think I prefer LSD better." And that's, you described it perfectly. Like, it just feels brighter and cleaner, and it feels like yeah, I'm just like more open to like the mental exploration of it all, rather than, like you said, like that gritty, like, oh, like you just feel like you're
Yeah.
rolling around in the mud and you have like stones stuck between your feet and you're trying to walk. It's just not enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get when people are like, oh, well, that's mushrooms like showing you things you need to face and et cetera. I do understand that. And I do think that's an important note. But I've had just as many positive revelations with LSD that I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Especially like what you were just talking about. Like, that's a pretty powerful revelation to just really be able to surrender and be like, this shit isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, and it's not like a sad, it's, it's funny. That's why I love it so much, because you just like, you're like, wow, I'm freaking hilarious. Like, this is ridiculous. I'm ridiculous. Like, this is hilarious that I get so wound up about this stuff all the time. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel kind of foolish. Like, it's like a soft, like, fun poking at the self. Like, oh, there you go. Making a big deal of everything again. But
Yeah, that's a beautiful place to come around to. When you can find the humor in the ways that we create our own suffering.
yeah, and it's so, and like it, you can carry that with you. And that's the one thing I realized is, like, when I first started doing psychedelics, like I felt like I needed to partake in them to get that effect. But then, a few years in, I realized, like, oh, that I just hold on to this and I can just be tapped into it all the time. Like, this, mental outlook that I have and this energy that I have, like, it's within me at all times. I can totally just hold on to it. And I did get a little, like, after I had that realization, then I was, then for like a year or two, I was a little intimidated by doing it every time, because I'm like, oh, what's gonna happen? Like, do I need to do this? And I just, think about it too much. And then when I would do it, I'd again, like, be like, oh, this was ridiculous. Like, this was amazing. It was like a nice little refresher, you know?
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like, that's something I've been thinking about a lot over the last several years, and like all the times I've sat with psychedelics and really thinking like, do I need this to get to this state of being? And a lot of the conversations I'm having with people lately are like mirroring exactly what you just said. It's almost like taking the medicines, the psychedelics, the plants, almost like opens the door, but then you have to continue to walk through it. Like that's a choice you can keep making. And maybe there are some other doors, and yeah, it's good to kind of like rinse your brain out every now and again with a re-up. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it more than anything can like show us that we have the ability to access some of these thoughts and states of being on our own,
Yeah, definitely.
which is pretty powerful.
Definitely.
So you had mentioned something about accidentally consuming DMT one time. I
Yeah.
would love to hear about that. That's not like, whoops, I hit a weed vape pen.
Yeah, I hadn't done it. That was the first time, and so I moved to Pittsburgh in I think like 2010, and the friend that I was talking about earlier that I ended up linking up with was the one that this happened with, and he was moving, and friends help friends move, and I was going to culinary school at the time, so I was limited like with the number of hours that I could help. I had to leave in the afternoon to go get ready for class. So I had to allow myself enough time to drive across the city to my house and get changed and go to class. And I had I had a few I had a few Rubbermaid bins of his in my car that he couldn't fit into his, and we parted ways, and he told me like as I was leaving, he goes, that little bin, just check and see what's in there, because I'm not sure what's in there. You might not want to just throw that away anywhere. And I was like, okay, I'll take it up to my place and I'll look at it and I'll handle it. And so I get my chef's uniform on. Like I have this chef's coat, chef's pants, a cravat, which is like a little knot tie that you have to wear. And I have this little like Rubbermaid container sitting in my family room, and I just open it up and I see a bowl in there. And I was like, oh, and I'm looking at it, and it's like a kind of a Sherlock looking bowl, like very alien like, and it had a smell. And a smell that like you could tell it had been like sitting there for a while. I thought it was opium because I had smelled that at music festivals in college, and I was like, "Oh, opium! I haven't smoked opium in a while." And I was like, "This will be nice," because I had like I think some kind of practical that evening in my lab class, and I was like, "This will be nice. I'll be able to chill out. I'll just whiz through my practical." And so I'm running late, right? I have a few minutes to like get from my house to school. And so I like grab this thing and I do like 3 power hits. I'm like, and as I take the third hit, like that was it. I don't like remember what happened after that, but I saw myself like sitting on my floor in my family room next to the recliner, and I was above myself, just like looking at myself. And I remember thinking, like, huh, how odd. And I just like looked outside and like out of my balcony and like looked, like kind of popped up over the canopy of the trees and like looked at the highway going to school. And I was like, oh, that's good. It's open. Like, it's not, I'll get there in plenty of time. And then I looked at myself again and said, like, I should probably get going. And next thing I know, I'm sitting there and I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, and I look and I'm like, how did I end up on the floor? And I have this thing in my hand and I'm like, no, what was this? And I'm like running through my head, like, what could this have been? Because it definitely was not opium, and it's not, I know it's not hash. Like, what do people smoke? And I was like, oh my God, was that DMT? And like I had like this, the weird after effect. Like I was still coming down a little bit from it, and I drove to class, and I remember I called my friend Joe, and I said there was something in that bin, and he goes, "Oh, what was it?" And I was like, "Some kind of glass piece." He goes, "Oh man, I've done nothing but smoke Deemsters out of that." And I was like, "Oh." So, and he goes, "Did you just smoke it?" And I said, "Yeah, I did. I had no idea what it was." And he was like, "Wow, how was it?" And I was like, I'm running late to class. Like, I, and
Yeah, Spirit Jess was about to like take off and leave you there and go to class.
yeah, I just remember like I was sitting at class and my teacher even said something to me. He's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." He's like, "You look flustered." I was like, "No, I'm fine." And I did my practical and I got home and I just remember like sitting there like that was such a unique experience. Like I wonder what it would be like if I actually like smoked, because it I just smoked like resin, like it was old and I was like, I wonder what it would be like if I tried it fresh. And I did like later down the road, and it was a very, very enjoyable experience. But honestly, like, I think I was meant to smoke it accidentally because I was so intimidated by it. Because I'd hear all these stories about these people, like, I'd hear stories from my friends about, it's just all the astral traveling they did. And it just really, I was like, oh, I don't need to mess with that. Like, I had contacts with like spirits when I was a kid and like the whole other world, other plane thing. Like I was just not really ready to explore it. But yeah, I think like accidentally smoking it like kind of, softened it for me. And instead of like jumping into an ice cold swimming pool, it was like I was walking into a tepid bath, you know? I was ready to do it the next time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, just maybe like made the barrier to entry a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, because I have a habit of like psyching myself out because I always try to be conscious of like what I'm getting myself into. Like there's certain things where I do a little research and I'm like, oh, I just don't need to mess with that. Like a Ouija board. I'm like, no, I'm good on that. Like I get it, but no thanks for me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I hear you on that. Yeah, I get it. That's cool, but I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need to open that side of things in that way.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you obviously were running late to class. How long do you think that little burst lasted?
I think like 5 to 7 minutes, maybe.
Okay.
Because I remember, like, I looked at my phone and I was like, oh, if I'm gonna get to class at like 5:15, I have to leave like in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And by the time I like got downstairs and looked at, you know, my car when I turned the car clock when I turned the car on, I was like, oh, I'm definitely a few minutes late.
So then but you experienced DMT again. So then what led you to want to try this again, and what was the experience like this time?
um, the next time I did it, I was hanging out with some friends, and one of them had a house in a ski resort, and it was in the summertime though, so no one was around. And anytime we'd go to this house, we'd always end up like walking onto the slope and just like watching the stars. And we ended up like it was a group of us, and we ended up like just posting up on the slope, sitting in a circle, and you know, taking it all in. And it was pretty profound. Like I had like some people, like they travel to different places. I really didn't. It was more like I traveled to all the parts of myself, like all the past versions of myself, like all of these memories came up, and I was like just witnessing myself in the moment, but like talking my present self through how to handle it all, because it was, stuff that I just hadn't handled or really knew how to handle. Um, so yeah, it was kind of like a slideshow almost, or like a watching, scenes of my life. And what was so unique to me is like that like feeling of like physically being in that place, the way your skin felt when you were there, or the way that like the wind felt and the smells that you had. Like I experienced all of that, and it was like profoundly beautiful.
That's pretty wild. Like you tapped back into the physicality of memories. That's really
Yes.
cool.
Yes. And yeah, that's like anytime I've done it, that's pretty much like, and it's kind of funny because I'm like, man, am I like really self-centered? Because like I hear all these stories about like my friends every time they do it. They're like, oh, I went to this place and I saw this guide, and I'm like, am I my own guide? Like, is this all about me? Like, yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I think it's been years since I've done it. I haven't done any psychedelics since I moved back to Bedford, and I feel like I'm getting ready. Like I feel like this summer's something's gonna call for it,
Yeah.
and I'm excited about it because it's been a while.
Yeah, you're feeling called back to this place. Who knows what will await you the next time?
Yeah.
So when you these experiences with DMT, like how are they different in like LSD very much kind of showed you like how to kind of surrender, chill out a little bit, stop caring so much about the little things. Like what was the biggest takeaway from the DMT experiences?
Um, I think the biggest takeaway for me was that if I want to, I can, really sit with myself and go back to these memories whenever I want, including all the amazing ones. And I think that kind of helped open it for me. And I don't really meditate, like I don't have a meditation practice, but I have a mindfulness practice kind of where, sometimes I'll sit with myself or it's just I don't I guess I meditate, but either way, I have like a practice where I'll, recall a memory from my childhood, and I'll be able to sit there and I'll get like the smells. It's particularly the smells that I'll get. And which is pretty cool because when I was a little kid and I would get contacts with spirits, like the first thing I would get was a smell. And I had some bad experiences, and it was always a particular smell. Like the scent was always like this particular, like it kind of like this, it smelled like metallic kind of, or like coal, like a little. Have you ever smelled coal before? Like it has like a sulfuric
Yeah.
burn smell, and it really kind of it scared the shit out of me when I was a little kid, and as I aged, like I really shut myself off from that, including all like the good things that came from having that. So I think like my big takeaway with DMT was that like I still have that ability, and I am like strong enough to like shield myself from bad things, and I'm strong enough to like recall these memories and get that experience whenever I want, um, which is
Do
pretty
you
nice.
do you still communicate with beings in the spirit world, or are you able to close that off?
I basically just work with my grandfathers. I don't like fucking with anyone else. It yeah, like I was playing around with it around COVID, and I don't know, it just wasn't for me. Like I like people I know, in all aspects. Like I like to know you, and so yeah, but it's basically just my grandparents, and I call on my ancestors, but really my grandfathers are the ones that like I try to make contact with. I'm open to making contact with.
Right. What does that, if you feel like sharing, what does that look like? How do you communicate with them?
So I'll just like I'll just start thinking of them and ask them a question, and something that I want their help or guidance on, and I'll get a smell. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he was big into gardening, and you know that smell that your skin gets whenever you're outside in the sun. It's not a bad
Oh,
smell. It's like a really nice smell, just like that
yep.
worked sun skin smell. And I'll get that smell, and then I'll feel like pressure on my right shoulder on the back, and usually like within a day, like I'll come the question that I want an answer to, I'll get an answer to. And it's not like he says it directly to me, but it'll come to me. And then with my grandfather on my paternal side, he always wore the Ralph Lauren cologne. And it, yeah, like I'll get that scent, and then I'll feel like, it feels like, I don't know, it feels like a hug from behind, but like more enveloping, I guess. Um, yeah, like I've gotten visuals before, but I haven't since I moved into this house. When I was in Pittsburgh, though, I definitely had some visuals of, there was I lived in a house. It was in a neighborhood called Polish Hill, and the house I lived in, this Polish couple had lived there for probably 60 some years. They were real active in the church, so they always had church members over. They had two big cast iron stoves in the house when I moved in. They always had church members over to make pierogies because the church didn't have a working kitchen, so they used their house. And the guy was really into woodworking, and he was an electrician. They both ended up dying in the house. And I never saw her, but I saw him twice in my house. And the one, then it was the same thing. Like I smelled him, and it smelled like a mechanic's garage. And I was sitting on the recliner, and he looked at me. I had my back patio door open, so I thought that someone was actually in my house. And he looked at me. He goes, "Oh, you're busy. I'll leave you alone," and walked out, and like touched my shoulder as he walked out. I was like, "What? No, you don't have to leave." And I was like, "Wait." And I ran out into the kitchen, into the back patio, and I was like, and I looked down the steps going to the street. I didn't see anyone. I asked my neighbor, I was like, "Did you just see someone like leave my house?" Because he was on his porch. He's like, "No." And I was like, that was weird. And I said something to my landlord about it, and she was like, "Oh, what did he look like?" And I said, "Oh, he was like tall, lanky. He had on like a really worn flannel. It was definitely from the 70s because the flannels back then were thicker, And I was like, it was definitely like an old flannel, and, jeans that were worn. And he had like, brown hair, like kind of going like this." And she was like, "Oh, that was definitely the owner of this house." And she's like, "He's probably so excited because you got the garden all cleaned up." She's like, "No one's gardened here since I bought the house." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
Oh, good. Glad I could help.
Yeah. And it wasn't, that was one of the first like full visual experiences I'd had since childhood. And I was so scared when I was a kid when that stuff would happen. And it was just like so comforting when it happened in Pittsburgh. And yeah, I don't know, it kind of softened me a little bit.
Did
But
he
still,
keep coming around? Like keep hanging out?
I would smell him. I never saw him after that. But
The scent, that's so cool. I've never heard that before as part of it. I've heard like temperature change and things like that, but I've never heard about the scent. That's really neat.
yeah, isn't that crazy? And like
Yeah,
everyone has a unique scent, you know? No one, anyone I've ever smelled, like I can always tell by the smell if it's someone I know or don't know. And it's weird.
yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you're like hyper attuned to scent now, just in the world around you because of that.
Definitely.
Like pick up. You could have a career making perfume someday, just picking up all the perfect notes for things.
I know, right?
Well, so this you started like actually seeing spirits when you were a kid, like actual visuals as a child,
Yeah.
and you had no idea. Like, how did your young brain even comprehend what was happening?
Um, I had said stuff to my parents, and they just acted like it didn't happen. So I kind of kept it to myself. My cousin, my cousins lived like 2 blocks away from me in this very old Victorian. And I have 3 cousins that lived in that house. And the middle one was around my age, and he also saw things. So it was, we could talk about it. Um, but anytime we mentioned it to the adults, like they'd always be like, "Oh no, I don't think so." But then when my aunt and uncle sold the house, they fessed up and said like, "Oh yeah, that house was very haunted. When we moved in there, before the kids could walk, the basement windows would always open and the doors would always lock and shut." And it's like, well, we
You're like,
saw
yeah, we were like literally looking at the people doing that. Hello.
yeah.
We
There
tried
was
to tell you.
there was a little boy. There's a little boy spirit, and he would always hang out in this one part of the hallway and this one bedroom. And I remember I was sleeping over there one night, and he kept pinching my toes. And I was sleeping with my cousin Lauren, and I ran down the hallway to Michael's room, and I said, "Can I sleep with you?" And he goes, "Yeah, what's going on?" I said, "Something's touching my toes." And he goes, "He does that to me all the time." And I was like, ugh. And we were so annoyed with it. What's funny now is like another family owns that house, and they have a little girl. And my mom told me this story a few years ago. They had she's probably like 8 or 10 now, but this is a few years ago when she was younger. And they just moved into that house, and they were getting ready to go on vacation. And she asked if she could bring her friend. And the mom was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, the little boy that I hang out with all the time." And it was kind of validating because it's like you guys didn't see it, but we saw it. And now here's another kid that's seeing this in the same exact house. They
Yeah.
sleep in the same bedroom too.
Yeah, he's there. The little boy is hanging out. He's just trying to make friends with other kids.
Yeah.
He's around.
I never looked into the history to like see if someone passed away there, what was going on. I probably should because it's, who knows what I'll find.
Yeah, it's super. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So this has just been like a lifelong experiences you've had with these spirits. But yet, I guess to me, like you're saying, like, yeah, I don't really like fuck with that too much. I feel like I'd be so curious to want to learn more from them. What keeps you from wanting to just kind of like dive into this more fully?
Um, I'm not sure. Like, I can't tell if I'm like holding myself back because I might find that it's something I absolutely love and, make it a driven purpose, or if I'm holding myself back because it's just not for me. Like, when COVID came around, I took a shamanic workshop, and I tried to start getting into journeying, and I ended up stopping like halfway through the program because I like kind of opened the floodgates, but I was getting a lot of like unwanted distractions and contact, and it just felt like the veil was too thin for me. And I was like, this is too much. I don't want to go further because I don't know like how this is going to open things up. And also like, if I'm like, I think what it comes down to is maybe I just don't trust myself to shield myself enough, but I think I can. So I don't know. It's something I'm still dancing around with. Like I've, I've kind of, yeah, the last few years, I definitely haven't messed with it. Since the journeying thing, I got a little freaked out. Um,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't
that's
know.
kind of like it's a whole different definition of having an open door policy when anybody could just come and, hey, I have a message. Hey, I got something to say. Hey, I'm over here. Like, can be noisy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what it was. It was like I was at work and like I was just, I was getting distracted and then I'd like be out and it kind of like it doesn't I don't know how else to describe it. Like I want to say it kind of made me feel crazy, but like that's not the right word. It just kind of made me feel like I was just too, you know, too far into the other side of things.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, I just want to be here and now. I want to buy my groceries and I want to, work in my garden and I want to talk to people when I want to talk to people. Like,
Yeah, this is too much socializing for me. I can't be having this.
yeah.
Oh, well, this has been awesome. I've really enjoyed chatting with you and hearing about your relationship with psychedelics and your connection to the spirit world, which is very cool. And yeah, thank you for sharing today.
Look, thank you so much for having me. This was great.